Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Whoa, Hold Your Horses. My name is Bonnie. This is my horse, Dream. The horse in the middle is Catalina, and the horse way over here by himself is Fabio, and there is a goat laying on the hay enjoying himself eating, and his name is Tagalong. Hence, he tags along with the horses. Now, today I would like to go over the history of the Pony Express. Did you know that the Pony Express only existed for 18 months? And when it collapsed and was over, doomed, it failed completely. It was in an enormous amount of debt, but that wasn't the only reason why it failed. So let's get into it. The Pony Express was started by a gentleman named William H. Russell. Back in the 1850s, I wanted to say 19, but we're going way back. In the 1850s, he would carry supplies to the United States Army and military camps. And that is basically how he got his start and where he got most of his money. And it was a successful business, but then again, it wasn't, because I don't know if you guys know this or not, but the government is not too keen on paying quickly. They'll give you the job and they'll give you the contract, but they'll make you work just as hard for the actual money. But anyway, he did have a large majority of money. And back in the 1800s, the only way to get a letter to the very west part of the United States, California, was you could send it by stagecoach. Would take 25 days once you put the letter on the stagecoach to get to Sacramento, California. Or you had another option, which was way worse. You could put your letter on a cargo ship that would go way down around South America and then back up all the way to California, where it would finally be delivered months later. So, unlike today, because we are so flooded with information and we get it so fast, like most of the time, we're getting the information before people that are actually involved in the story are getting the information. So, it wasn't a very good way to send information. And William had this idea of creating a way to get letters across the country on horseback. And he had a plan to be able to get the letters from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Sacramento, California in just 10 days. That was huge. So William Russell went to the White House and he told them about his idea of having this new way of getting mail across the United States by horseback. The United States Congress loved this idea because, hello Tag, we're gonna see if Tag is a good boy. Sometimes he's a good boy and sometimes he likes to knock things over. So hopefully Tag will decide to be a good boy. But anyway, so the United States loved this idea of the news getting faster to the state of California. And now he's in the way of the camera, y'all. So just bear with it. All right, so the reason why the White House was very interested in the news getting to the state of California faster was because California was a very new state. And back in 1859, 1860, when this was all beginning, there was a need for more states to be free states, to be union states. And of course, Washington, D.C. wanted California to be a free state. So they were very eager for California to get the news that was going on politically very quickly to help them to persuade them to become a union state. But unfortunately, that wasn't enough for the White House or the Congress to help fund the Pony Express. So William was left to his own to make the Pony Express, to establish it, to use his own money to set up how the riders of the Pony Express would get from St. Louis, Missouri to Sacramento, California. So William Waddell and Alexander Majors was responsible for creating this path to make it the most efficient and fastest way for the riders to ride across the country so that the letters got there, or the news got there, very, very quickly. So what they ended up doing was establishing what they call relief stations. And these relief stations would be where fresh horses were waiting, there would be food, and of course, at the end of the ride, at the end of the day, there would be a place for the riders to be able to go to sleep. There would also be the new riders there waiting for the rider that was carrying the mail and the newsletters to take over. So it was a constant, there was always somebody riding a horse to get to California to deliver the newspapers and the letters. So this was all set up using the money that William Russell had already had from delivering supplies and stuff to the U.S. Army and the military camps. So by the time he set up all of it, well, by the time Mr. Waddell and Mr. Majors set up all these relief stations, the money was definitely running thin. And the relief stations, some of them, from my understanding, because I wasn't able to like really get it clear, but they used the old trail that people used when they were going to Oregon and Washington during the gold rush. And what I didn't know, they also used the trails that the Mormons used to get to Utah. And that happened in 1849 was the California Gold Rush, and then the Mormons went to Utah in 1846, I do believe. So they used a lot of the establishments that were already set up. And so people were already living there, so they just would put them under contract and would pay them to use the stations that were, or, you know, the establishments that were already there. And then I imagine there were some that they had to actually build up themselves for the in-between places so that it wasn't so far apart for the horses to be exchanged for a new horse. And the riders would ride about 10 to 15 miles, sometimes a little bit further depending on where the relief station was, before they would have a new fresh horse. And then the rider would ride between 75 to 100 miles. That would be their shift, their run, which that's huge. So just stop for a second and think about a town that is about 75 to 100 miles away from you. And then imagine that the start of your day, you're on a horse, and they would keep the horses at either a trot or a canter, but mostly it was at a trot because that is the speed that horses can go the most, their endurance, at a trot for that long. That is what the Pony Express riders did. And they would be able to go from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California in just 10 days. Absolutely amazing. There were also tons of weather changes, as you can imagine, because this went on all year. That was the ultimate goal, was this was going to be a company that was consistent. And so the weather changes would be dramatic from Missouri to California, and you're going through the desert, and then you're going through the Rocky Mountains and everything else that you would be going through. So you could start off the day where it's super hot, and then in the middle of the journey of getting to California, it could be literally having a blizzard. And then you get to California and you have weather that California has. So it had to have been quite an interesting ride. And of course, it wasn't just the one single rider, it would be a different rider, but still, you get the point. All right, so now that we've established what the Pony Express was and what they did, let's get into the details. Now, after the Pony Express was established, like I said, Mr. Russell, the starter of the Pony Express, his money was running thin, and he was definitely sweating, how in the world am I going to keep this going? So he started going to banks even before the Pony Express actually had its first run. The amount of money that they spent, they said that the Pony Express had anywhere between 400 and 500 horses in all. And I'm not quite sure how much they paid for the horses back then, but you know, that had to have been expensive. The feed for the horses, because they have to be fed right away, so that was expensive. And then you had all the relief stations, and these people were getting paid for setting up their establishment for the relief station. So that money was out, and now you have to figure out how we're going to keep this going so that we can become a successful business. So he started going to banks, and he was begging and begging for loans, but nobody was taking it. Everybody was just like, no, Mr. Russell, we're sorry, we can't invest in this. And he wasn't getting any funding from the government. So he was probably really nervous about how in the world am I going to keep this going? He hasn't even gotten started. Going to banks after banks after banks, and he was being turned down. And then finally, somebody was like, hey, why don't you go to, and I'm going to say his name wrong because I just do. I do believe it's pronounced Godder or Godder. His last name was Bailey. So we're just gonna call him Mr. Bailey. But Mr. Bailey worked in the Internal Revenues of Affairs office in the White House. And he was in charge of this huge, lucrative pile of bonds that was set aside for the Native Americans. So somebody at a bank told Mr. Russell that he should go to Mr. Bailey and ask Mr. Bailey if he'll sign off on some of those bonds that he has, and then you can use them for the Pony Express. So, being as desperate as Mr. Russell's was, he did. He went and he found Mr. Bailey at the White House, and he told Mr. Bailey all about his Pony Express. Mr. Bailey probably was very aware because the news was getting out, and he said, sure, I'll give you the bonds, no problem. So Mr. Bailey signed off on these bonds to give to Mr. Russell for the Pony Express, and he gave him $870,000 of Native American bonds, which in today's money, that is over $17 million. $17 million. He just said, sure, take it. So Mr. Russell's did, in desperation, or whatever, but he took it, which, I mean, goes to show you that the government really hasn't changed. The government's just crooked. They're gonna spend money where they're not supposed to. But anyway, getting back to the Pony Express. So, Mr. Russell took the money to help carry the Pony Express to actually be able to begin the Pony Express. So anyway, so the first day of the Pony Express started in 1860. And it is said that the very first rider of the Pony Express was Johnny Frye. Now, Johnny Frye started off on a Mustang in St. Joseph, Missouri. And there was a crowd of people that had gathered, and the crowd was cheering, and they were so excited. You have to imagine what an event this must be. I mean, normally you would sit around and wait for the stagecoach to come in for exciting news. And now you're actually a part of the very first dash for Sacramento, California on horseback. It had to be so exciting. They had cannons that were like, you know, firing off in the background, and I'm sure people from all over came and gathered, and I'm sure it was just very loud and very exciting, and the energy, and you can imagine being Johnny Frye, this young rider who was under the age of 18, getting ready to take off on the very first horse for the Pony Express. And that's exactly what happened. He took off, and he ended up going onto a ferry that I believe would take him over to the next plot of land where he dashed off for his day. And that is how the Pony Express got started. Now, how much did it cost to send mail on the Pony Express? This, for me, was shocking. In order to send a letter to, or send a letter using the Pony Express, it cost $5 an ounce to send. a letter, and the newspapers were the same. There was no favors for the newspaper. So imagine how desperate you were to get news across the country in a faster amount of time. So a lot of people ended up writing their letters, and the newspaper companies would actually print the paper on tissue paper so that it would be lighter to help with the cost of sending the mail. And they ended up, after, I wasn't really able to figure out how long it took, but after a short amount of time, the Pony Express lowered the amount from $5 an ounce to $1 an ounce. So it was still expensive, but that had to have been like a relief to be able to send a letter across the United States for a lot cheaper. And you figured out to put it on tissue paper, and so that made it cheaper as well. But because they went and they resolved to going to tissue paper to make it lighter to send, there is literally only a couple of letters left to this day that were actually sent by the Pony Express. And one of them I thought was very, very cool. It was sent by a gentleman in St. Louis, Missouri. He was a French immigrant, and he was sending the letter to a French immigrant who had moved to California, and he was actually a very successful wine merchant. And I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to learn that the contents of the letter was talking about the prices and the newest, latest wine that was in France. And that is, according to what I was able to find, the only existing letter that still exists that was sent on the Pony Express. And so, anyway, the goat is in the way. Dad, you're being a pest. You're being a pest. Okay, so now I would like, go lay down, Ted. So go lay down, Ted. I would like to talk a little bit about the women that were involved in the Pony Express, because historically, and from what I was looking up, most people talk about the men and the cowboys that were involved in the Pony Express. And to start off talking about the women that were involved in the Pony Express, I would like to... Fabio, no! All right, different angle, guys. Sorry about that. Fabio knocked the camera over. So, all right, to talk about the women that worked in the relief stations, I would like to start off by using the famously stated quote of Abigail Adams, the second wife of President John Adams. She said, "Remember the ladies." So, let's remember the ladies of the Pony Express. The only way women were able to help contribute to the Pony Express was in the relief stations as housekeepers, cooks, and, well, housekeepers and cooks. So the very first wife that I would like to mention was a lady who had a relief station in Plum Creek Territory, and she was known to use 100 pounds of flour every day to bake bread. And so she sold her bread by the loaf, she sold cheese, and she would also sell a whole meal. And she was just one of the ladies that was mentioned. In Kansas City, there was a lady named Mrs. Tom Perry, and she was, you guys, being slapped in the face by a horsetail hurts. She was known to be an excellent cook and actually got recognized by Mark Twain, and he literally quoted that her coffee was excellent. And then there was Miss Smith. I wasn't sure where she was located, or where her relief station was, but it did say that her location was located in a 2-story hotel. So this is one of the relief stations that I assumed was already an established business that was asked to be a relief station. But Miss Smith, the riders loved staying at her place because they said that her house or her hotel was kept extremely clean, and they enjoyed her cooking. The next wife was a French-speaking wife who I couldn't find a name on, but she owned a ranch in Marshall County, and she was best known for her ham and eggs, her hot rolls, and her excellent coffee. I can imagine how important coffee was to these writers. And the next wife that was mentioned was Sophia Hollenberg. I may be saying the last name wrong, but her and her husband actually established the Hollenberg's station. And they were, it's in Kansas, and it actually has become a historical site by the Historical Kansas Society, and you can actually go and visit it today, which I think would be awesome to go and do. And then there was Molly Slade and her children in Wyoming at a station called Horseshoe Station, and her husband was actually the superintendent of the Pony Express, and it was gossiped that he was known to be quite a gunslinger. The next wife that I'm going to mention is a very interesting story. This one's also in Wyoming, and her name was Miss Moore. I don't know what her maiden name was, but she was actually traveling, it sounded like alone, to go to Salt Lake City, Utah. And she stopped on the way at Three Crossings Station. And when she was there, the husband and the wife, I guess, got to talking. I'm sure it was over dinner. And they were like, oh, so you're going to go to Salt Lake City, Utah? And she was probably like, yes, and I am going to try to find a husband. I'm making this scene up because I have no idea. But anyway, it's said that while she was talking to the Moores, they had told her, well, you realize that the Mormons in Salt Lake City take on more than one wife. Well, I guess that was not at all the picture that she had in her head, because she had decided from then on that she was not going to continue her journey to Salt Lake City, but instead ended up staying and living with the Moore family. And it is said that later she became Mr. Moore's wife. So I don't know if Mr. Moore became a widow and then she became his wife, or if he took on another wife. I am not really sure. That was not clear. But it is said that she was an excellent cook, and people loved staying at that station because the house was spotless. So cleanliness was very important to a lot of the writers and people that were probably just traveling across to California. And those are the only wives that I was able to find mentioned while doing my research on the Pony Express. So let's jump into, which my horses have left me. They have gone to the barn. But I was going to go briefly into what kind of horses did the Pony Express use. So to begin with, it is called the Pony Express, but it was by no means actually ponies that were used. A pony is 14.1 hands, which is 4 feet 8 inches or shorter. A horse is considered 14.2 hands or taller. And the horses that were used for the Pony Express were 14.2 hands or taller. Most of the horses that were used in the Pony Express were Mustangs, because they were able to go across the terrain of the desert and the mountains in the western part of the United States. But now in the eastern United States, the most commonly used horses, which I said mine have left, were Morgans and Thoroughbreds, because that was the terrain that they were used to. So they tried to make sure that the animal was well adapted to the environment in which they would be running or trotting across. And that is the horses in the Pony Express that were mentioned. I'm sure there were tons and tons of breeds, but mostly it was Mustangs. Now, the riders of the Pony Express were also very interesting. They wanted the riders to be young, which I would totally freak out. I have 2 girls who are just now 18, And I would, well, actually, sorry, one of them just turned 19. And I would totally freak out if they were like, yeah, I'm going to join the Pony Express and go galloping across the United States. I would just totally freak out. But anyway, so back in the 1800s, things were different. And they wanted the riders to be 18 or younger. It is said that the youngest rider was only 11 years old. And then of course they did say that there was a rider that was probably in his mid-20s. One of the riders claimed to be even older than that, but that was just a claim. It's not actually like actual proof. So anyway, they also had to be very light. They did not want a rider to be more than 125 pounds. And they also had to say an oath to go into the Pony Express. You were not allowed to use foul language or drink. And it was a whole pledge, but I don't remember it line for line. I just know that the main two parts was foul language and you weren't allowed to drink. We all know that that rule got broken. And actually an eyewitness, his name was Richard, and he said he rarely ever saw a sober rider. So we know that rule got broken. And so that is the requirements of becoming a Pony Express rider. And they were paid between $100 and $150 a month for their services, which is over $3,000 today. And it's a lot of money, but not really when you start to compare how much the food was that they were buying along the way. And for an entire month, that's not really a whole lot of money. But anyway, so that is what they got. After they were hired by the Pony Express, they were to carry a rifle, or it might have been a pistol. Not really, I forgot if it was a rifle or a pistol, but anyway, it was only to be used in self-defense. It was not to be used for any other purposes. And a horn, they would blow a horn right before they got to the next relief station, so that the person that was at that relief station would know that they were coming, and they would have the horse, the fresh horse, out ready to go for the rider, and the rider would come in, most of the time jump off the horse he was riding, and he would grab the satchel, anyway, he would grab what was called a mochita, which was the what was actually carrying the mail. He would grab it off of his saddle and he would jump off his horse. He would run to the fresh horse that was waiting for him. And sometimes the person at the relief station would already be running alongside the fresh horse, having that horse trotting and ready to go. And then he would run and jump and leap onto he would put the mochita onto the saddle of the fresh horse, and then he would run and jump on himself, and away he would continue. And so that is the riders and a little bit of how they went from one horse to a fresh horse. Now, the next thing that I would like to talk about is the mochita, which I am probably saying it wrong, but it is Spanish, which I barely speak English. It's Spanish for pouch. Now, the mochita it had 4 pouches, and it would carry the mail. The first run, I forgot to mention this earlier, that Johnny Frye did, there was 49 letters and 3 newspapers in his mochita. And they would put the mail in St. Joseph, Missouri, or Sacramento, California. They would put it in and they would lock it. And the only people that had the keys to the lock were the people that would get the mail at the final destinations, either St. Joseph, Missouri, or Sacramento, California. It could not be opened anywhere in between. And that is how they carried the mail across country on horseback. And one of the most important pieces of mail that was carried by the Pony Express was on March 1861. So the Pony Express was almost a year old because they started on well, the very first run of the Pony Express started April 1860. So they were almost a year old, 11 months old. The Pony Express was carrying the most important piece of mail they had ever carried. And it was on March 1861. They were carrying Abraham Lincoln's inauguration. Now this inauguration was super, super important because remember in the beginning, the reason why Washington, D.C. liked the idea of the Pony Express was because they wanted California to become a Union state. And the Abraham Lincoln inauguration helped California decide to become a free state of the United States of America. And it was said that that was the fastest newspaper or article that got delivered by the Pony Express. They carried it from Nebraska to Sacramento, California in 7 days and 17 hours. Okay, now I would like to talk about the riders of the Pony Express that were mentioned that I was able to find. The first one that I've already mentioned is Johnny Frye. So Johnny Frye was the very first said to be Pony Express rider to start it all. And later in life, it's actually very sad what happens to him. But I would actually like to save that to the end of the video. So the next rider that was famous was Pony Bob. And his last name was Haslam. It's Haslam. And the reason he became famous was because he was traveling with the mail and he got to his first relief station and he knew something was wrong. It wasn't right. His horse wasn't ready for him and it just didn't look right. Well, it ended up being that that relief station was ambushed by the American Indians. There was the American Indian War going on. I'm not sure if that's actually what the war was called, but anyway, there was a war going on between the Native Americans and the United States. And the Native Americans would attack the relief stations and they would rob the people that were in charge of the relief stations. Most of the time they would kill the people and then they would steal all of the horses. So when Pony Bob came up to the first station, he realized that this is what's happened. So he doesn't have a fresh horse. He's literally just ran across the territory for 10 to 15 miles when he was supposed to get a new horse, and there's not a new horse. So he does the only thing that he knows to do, and that is to go to the next station. Well, when he gets to the next station, he is desperately pleading with the owner of the station. You cannot stay here. This is going to be, attacked. You need to come with me. It'll save your life. And they were very reluctant. They were just like, no, I think I'm good, So he just begs and begs and begs and pleads. And the station manager finally agrees, okay, fine, I'll go with you. And he ends up taking him on down the line. And it turned out that Pony Bob's gut feeling was very true. That very night, that relief station was attacked and all of those horses were stolen. Well, before the end of Pony Bob's ride, on this particular ride, he would end up going about 95 miles because before he was even able to get a fresh horse. And that became a very famous ride that was talked a lot about for his bravery to keep going. He had to run through the night with the mail, and he was literally quoted for saying that while he was running his horse, and he couldn't see obviously because it was dark, he kept paying attention to his horse's ears because he knew that the horse would actually hear anybody that was hiding in the bushes or the cliffs or wherever he was running through. He knew that the horse would hear it first, so he would pay attention and notice if the horse knew something was out there before he. Anyway, he ended up surviving and making it, and he ended up delivering the mail, so he became a famous Pony Express rider. And the other Pony Express rider that I was able to find out about was Charlie Miller. and they called him Bronco. And Charlie Miller is the Pony Express rider that claimed he was only 11 years old when he started riding for the Pony Express. So anyway, that is a little bit of what I was able to find out about the actual riders of the Pony Express. And excuse me, I have to... Okay, so now that you've heard the story of some of the riders, you may be thinking that the most dangerous part of the Pony Express was the riders, but it wasn't. The most dangerous part was actually the people in the relief stations because of the attacks that were going on and the horses being stolen. It is, from what I was able to find, about 16 people died at relief stations and only 4 Pony Express riders actually died. So it was actually more dangerous for you to be one of the relief station members. The 4 recorded deaths of the Pony Express, and these are just the 4 I was able to find. There may be more out there that I haven't found. If you know of any, let me know down below. But the 4 that I was able to find out about was 2 riders actually froze to death. You remember I was saying how you could start probably in a climate like this, and then before your day was over, you were running through a blizzard. And so 2 riders were reported to have froze to death. 1 rider is said died in an unrelated accident, so I'm not really sure what that means. And then 1 rider who proves that nobody really kept the oath that they swore in to be a rider was drunk, killed a man, and hung for the murder of the man he killed. So that was how another rider died. I guess it would have been important for him to have kept the oath. Established all of that, let's talk about what the heck happened. What killed the Pony Express? So earlier, if you remember, I was telling you about Mr. Bailey, who worked in the White House in Internal Affairs, and he had given Mr. Russell the bonds that were supposed to be for the Native Americans. Well, it was that, and it wasn't that, because there was competition for the Pony Express. And so first I'm going to go into what happened to Mr. Russell, and then I'll go back into what the competition was that actually put the final nail in the coffin for the Pony Express. Well, it turns out that they found out what you got, Dream. You got a fly bothering you somewhere? Oh, don't hit me. I see it. Yeah, gotta be careful when you're sitting that close to a hind leg. But anyway, so what ended up happening was that the government noticed that $870,000 worth of bonds for the Native Americans had gone missing. So they did an investigation, which of course led them to Mr. Bailey. Mr. Bailey, of course, he was like, I don't know, and totally throws William Russell under the bus. Like, let's just say that he threw him under the stagecoach. And so the United States issued a warrant, and to the surprise of Mr. Russell, on Christmas Eve, and what a way to start Christmas, right? He was completely surprised when U.S. Marshals showed up at his door and were there to arrest him for embezzlement. So it sounded like he went willingly, didn't put up a fight, and he was taken to Washington, D.C. and put in jail with a bond of $500,000 back then, which is way over $16 million now. Now, of course, Mr. Russell didn't have the money, he didn't have the money for the bond, so he just remained in jail. On January 11th, 16th, and 29th, I do believe, so basically a month, Mr. Russell was being taken to court in front of a grand jury. He did submit a letter stating why he borrowed the money. He didn't take the money, it was his intentions to pay it back. So on January 29th, 1861, Mr. William Russell was indicted for stealing and defrauding the United States government by a grand jury. So was Mr. Bailey. And another guy, he was like a secretary, and he signed off on the bonds, and his name was John Floyd. So he also got indicted for the same crime. Now, how much time did Mr. Russell get? And Mr. Bailey? And Mr. Floyd? 0. You know why? Tell you why. Because, which I'm going to say this wrong because I have a problem with pronouncing things, the Civil War began. And the Civil War drew more attention than the bonds crime. So they basically got away with it. And by April, which is still a long time, because you got to remember, Christmas Eve, he went to jail. April, which is, what, about 4 months later? 4.5 months later? Mr. Williams was released from jail and was able to continue on with his life. And he actually didn't really get, like, there was no punishment. He didn't have to pay it back. He didn't have jail time. The United States ended up being the one who had to reimburse the money. So they ended up being the one that paid it back, and Mr. Russell didn't have to. He did help in a way because he did deliver that inauguration to California so quickly that California became a union state. So in a way, is it kind of balancing it out? I don't know. But anyway, the Civil War broke out, and Mr. Russell was able to not have any punishment of taking the bonds from the United States. So after that all happened, Mr. Russell knew he was doomed. He wasn't going to be able to make any money. And at that current time, the Pony Express was in debt over $200,000, which is literally almost $7 million today. So he obviously realized that he wasn't going to get any money from anywhere else, and the Pony Express was having an issue with the horses being stolen, and like I was saying earlier, the competition. So the competition that ended up coming along was the telegraph service. And the telegraph service actually got funding from the United States so that it could hurry along the telegraph lines across the United States so that messages could be sent almost instantaneously. I mean, like, it was basically the internet of its time, and the Pony Express could not compete with it. They obviously could not get the mail across the United States as quickly as the telegraph was able to. And it was so much cheaper to send a telegraph than it was to send mail through the Pony Express. So Mr. Russell knew that the Pony Express was doomed. So he ended up resigning as president of the Pony Express. And in April, probably very shortly after he got out of jail, he released and let everybody know that he was turning over what remained of the Pony Express to the Wells Fargo's company. Wells Fargo was a stagecoach company. So basically, delivering your mail across the United States went back to the stagecoach method, which would take about 25 days. So by September, the only thing that the Pony Express riders were still doing was actually delivering telegraph messages from one telegraph station to another telegraph station because the lines weren't completed all the way. So that's what they were being utilized as. October 24th, 1861, the telegraph company had completed its lines. It no longer had a break from one place to the other, and they could send a telegraph from Washington, D.C. and reach California by telegraph 100% without the need of the Pony Express. So by October, which was just 18 short months after the Pony Express began, the Pony Express was dead forever. never to run another pony and rider across, I should say, never to run another horse and rider across the United States to deliver mail again. That is the end of the Pony Express. So, before I let you guys go, I would like to just give you what happened. What happened to Pony Bob? What happened to Johnny Frye, which I told you earlier. It's quite sad. And whatever happened with William Russell? Did he ever establish himself? Did he ever make money again? Well, I'm here to tell you. William Russell did try to make his fortune again. His first attempt was in Colorado. He was hoping he was going to make it big in the gold. He didn't. His second attempt was in New York, where he tried partnering with someone, and he wanted to be a broker in a brokerage company, and it was a total flop as well. He had to sell everything that he had to pay off his enormous debt that he had trying to start the Pony Express, and he ended his life basically with nothing. He moved in with his daughter, who lived in St. Louis, Missouri, for a while when his health began to deteriorate. And then, I'm not sure why, but he ended up moving out of his daughter's home and moving into his son's home, which I'm not sure where, but it was in Missouri. And he ended up dying at the age of 60. Pony Bob. Pony Bob was the famous rider who had to go about 95 miles before he was able to stop when he was delivering the mail because of all of the attacks that were happening at the relief stations. He ended up going to work for the Wells Fargo's stagecoach company, and he worked there for quite a while, and he was in and out of the public's mentionings because, you know, of course, he was still famous. And Wild Buffalo Bill ended up talking about him and doing a show. He, I believe, was very starstruck by Pony Bob, so Buffalo Bill did help keep Pony Bob's name alive. And Pony Bob ended up moving to... So Pony Bob ended up dying February 29th, 1912 of a stroke. And it is said that Buffalo Bill paid for his memorial and his tombstone, and it was also put in the paper for his obituary that he was a Pony Express rider, and they talked about his famous ride. Now the other rider, Johnny Frye, I just feel really bad for this one. Johnny Frye ended up joining the Union Army after the Pony Express. He became a soldier, and he was killed in an ambush. He was sadly only 18 years old when he died in the Battle of Baxter Springs in Kansas. And that is sadly the end of Johnny Frye's life. And that is all I have. That is, according to me and how I read it. I can totally be wrong, so please look it up for yourself. But that is what I learned looking up what the Pony Express was, how it existed, how it tried to begin, and how it ended. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you did enjoy it. I do have a lot of these planned. I'm not really sure exactly what the themes are going to be. I'm just going to do things that I find interesting and things that maybe people don't know about, or maybe you do know about it and you just want to know how Bonnie interpreted it, because I will definitely interpretate it in the way that I read it. And so anyway, I hope you really did enjoy. Please comment, please like, please subscribe. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you again real soon. Bye!